Hello and welcome back to the Lowdown, everybody, where today we're talking about struggling title contenders. Today we discuss whether it is time for Arsenal fans to panic.
There can be legitimate question marks asked from Arsenal fans about the summer business in forward areas.
And do City fans have any reason to be worried? Titles could be stripped. They could be found innocent. No one has a clue. Welcome back to the Lowdown, everybody, where we've got a monster title race episode for you guys today. There are some concerns as we record this before Arsenal's game against Inter Milan. The Arsenal season is on a bit of a knife edge, and City, well, they've lost 3 games in a row for the first time in years. Do they have a right to be worried, though? To discuss that, I'm joined by Michael McCubbin and Joe Tomlinson. Let's get straight into it, guys. We're going to kick off with Arsenal. It's been far from an ideal start, Joe, having finished just 2 points behind City last season. What's going on with them right now?
I'm interested to hear you guys' takes on this first, because I feel like I may be less negative about Arsenal than you two are. I think that, Arsenal have suffered pretty badly with injuries, and we can kind of take the mick out of them to some level, can't we? This supposed injury crisis with one player being actually significantly injured in Martin Odegaard. But I do think that the shuffling around of the back four has been very, very significant, even in the second half against Liverpool when Gabriel came off, Timber came off. I think that did have a significant impact on the flow. The midfield shape has had to change because of that Odegaard injury, and I just don't think they are as well prepared as Manchester City in terms of experience depth to come on and have impacts in games when those sorts of injuries happen. So I'm personally not as negative about Arsenal as you guys are. I can see some of the arguments, and I've seen the statistics. They're facing double the number of shots on target than they were last season. David Raya is having to have significant impacts on games, but it's very early in the season, and I still think Arsenal will find their flow. I think that if you took the first 7 games of this season, the first 7 games of last season, the records were absolutely identical to points, to goals conceded, to goals scored. Over the last 3 games, things have unwound a little bit, but overall, I'm still very positive about Arsenal. I do think they'll turn it around. I don't think the problems are nearly as deep set as I've seen some people say online.
Okay, fair enough. I mean, it's worth looking at the overall picture as a whole, and, it's interesting to hear your thoughts on it as well, and we will continue to get your thoughts as it goes on. But Mikey, from my perspective, I'm a little bit troubled by what I'm seeing on the pitch, and a little bit troubled about what I see happening to them for the rest of the season, because they've already dropped 7 points, although they're 7 points behind Liverpool. No side in Premier League history in a 38-game season has ever come back from this deficit after 10 games.
Really?
Yeah. The last side to do so was Blackburn in 1995, and that was a 42-game season, and they had a game in hand at this stage. So already it feels like this game against Chelsea at the weekend, which could see Chelsea go above them, and also, if Spurs beat Ipswich, Spurs go above them, and the gap could be pretty insurmountable. And as Joe says, it is early on in the season, but we've seen title challenges collapse at this stage already. So are you with me that you are a little bit concerned about this, or are you more with Joe that it's just a product of circumstances in red cards and injuries?
I think it's an interesting one, because I don't think you can discount the circumstances, but the circumstances have, they have led to Arsenal being in this position, right? And that's a really interesting stat there. I feel like teams have overcome bigger deficits, but maybe later in the season. I'm thinking like 2003, I think United overcame an 8-point deficit. I think Man City did in 2012.
Arsenal
but later
led
on,
by 10 points with a game in hand at one stage, didn't they?
Mad.
Was it last season or the season before?
Yeah. So it is possible, but I guess it is still difficult, and I can't remember.
It's a large deficit at this stage of the season.
It is, and also there is another interesting stat that's come out recently about actually the league table after 10 games. Generally speaking, will represent roughly what the league table will look like at the end of the season. I think there's not that much difference in that sense, but nevertheless, I mean, given the circumstances, where Arsenal are at right now is not a disaster, but those circumstances, they point to concerns that we had even before the season. I think we sat down here, just before the season, and we were, recommending like the perfect signing for each club. And one point that I did raise, and I didn't expect, it to have, come to light so soon in this season, was Arsenal's lack of backup for Martin Odegaard. I wasn't expecting Odegaard to be injured so early in the season. And actually, his injury record has been pretty good at Arsenal, but it was just a bit of a hunch. But it has been so stark, like just how reliant Arsenal are on Odegaard, and how, with Emil Smith-Rowe going to Fulham, with Fabio Vieira not at the club this season either, there really is a lack of a backup there. And we've seen, Mikel Marino kind of used in a more advanced midfield role, and he's, that's a difficult job for him because it's not a role that he's used to, or at least, the kind of output that he's having to, create in the absence of Odegaard. It's not really his game in the final third. Saka has had to compensate massively. He's putting up, over 3 chances a game now. He's putting up 3.5 shots a game. That's a lot of work for Saka. And, a lot of that's coming from corners as well. Like Arsenal's chance creation away from set pieces is really, really harmed by Odegaard being out of the side. And you compare that to Man City, who we will get onto a bit, who, are, 3 losses on the bounce and whatnot, defensive issues. But attacking wise, 8 players in the Man City side in the Premier League this season are putting up 2 or more chances a game. Arsenal, I think it's just Saka. Who's doing that. That's how stark it is. And last season you had Martinelli, Odegaard and Saka all doing that, and that was in a season for Martinelli in which he wasn't at his 100% best. So I think chance creation is a real problem for Arsenal this season with the absence of Odegaard, and he's potentially going to come back tonight against Inter. The feeling around Arsenal could change quite a lot with an emphatic victory at Inter, but equally their away form at the moment is really, really bad. If they lose to Chelsea on Sunday and don't score, it will be the first time that they've lost 3 away games in the league in a row and not scored since 1994. So there are reasons to be concerned about that. As for the discipline side of things, they've played 16% of minutes so far this season without 11 men on the field.
I know you've spoken about chance creation and numbers dropping off. I think it is extremely harmed by the fact they've had 3 games of the 10 they've played in this season hit down to 10 men. The numbers have had to drop because they've had to drop as a team to get into a defensive structure to try and see and get something out of that game. The numbers, particularly against Manchester City, absolutely skew stats massively in City's favour of chance creation numbers, defensive line height, things like that I feel are a little bit down to circumstance. Look at Arsenal's fixture list: Spurs away, Villa away, City away. Even Bournemouth away is a really tough place to go. It's even tougher when, City had been out to 10 men, Bournemouth had been out to 10 men. So I think the statistics and the underlying numbers have been hampered a little bit by circumstance that I don't see carrying on across the next 28 games of this season, where they're going to have another, by the current rate, they'd have another 8 red cards. I just don't see that happening. I also think that the return of Odegaard is going to be a massive factor, but I do agree with some of your points about, for me, they've just got a little bit too defensive. They've gone into their shell just a little bit too much. I think that Nwaneri should be playing minutes. He's that talented at this stage where, for me, the 4-4-2 doesn't always work. I don't think it worked away at Newcastle when they obviously played Trossard as the supporter striker to Havertz in this slightly more defensive midfield setup of Rice and Marino than you would classically see under an Arteta side. I would rather just see Nwaneri given a go in there. I think he's that talented. And we've seen 17-year-olds prosper before in the Premier League, particularly in attacking midfield positions. He can do it in there. I think they should go back away from the 4-4-2 and go back to kind of what Arteta found his feet doing, which is being a little bit more progressive and a little bit more fun.
Yeah,
they've just got it's a bit dull to watch Arsenal at the moment.
But that is a massive thing. I mean, Arsenal's progressive pass numbers are way, way down. I think they're 6th in the league, which is below Fulham. I mean, that goes to show. And again, skewed by the fact
Partey's having to play right back though, and rather than playing into that midfield area, you've lost Ben White's progression.
Well, probably, a little bit for sure. And also, like Rice has not, his passing numbers have been way down. His pass completion, his progressiveness, like is way down as well because he's having to play a different role as well. And I again, you can talk about the amount of time they've been down to 10 men, but equally you can talk about the tactics as well. Like even when they've had 11 men, it doesn't feel like Arsenal are, keeping the ball as well, and also they're not being as effective direct as they were before. I think their pass completion in terms of long balls is way down. I think it's like 15th in the league, and you compare that to Man City, I think they're top of the league in that sense. So it just feels like things aren't really clicking in that sense. And injuries have their part to play, but so does the tactical outlook. And also, I think there's pressure on Arteta as well. Like they're 7 points behind Liverpool now. Like Arne Slot has been able to start this season. Okay, he's had an easier run of it, and we can get onto that when we talk about the title race. But Arne Slot, by contrast, he's new in the job. He hasn't had to be too hard line with implementing a new style of play. He's been able to rely on those players playing with a bit of freedom as well. And there's just no pressure on him at all. No pressure whatsoever. Arteta's into a third title race now with Arsenal. And in the summer, was being talked up. This was being talked up as Arsenal's season, really. I think that, although that's kind of intangible and you can't put a number on that, in terms of where Arsenal are now, I can't believe that pressure can't be taken into account at least a little bit, especially given what's going on behind the scenes. Edu resigning as sporting director. Like that's not ideal for Arsenal at this stage of the season. The fact that the club's hierarchy, the future of the club's hierarchy is now uncertain in terms of where they go next. Because at the moment, there's not, there isn't a clear candidate for who takes over from Edu. I know his assistant has been earmarked in a recent Telegraph report as the successor, at least for now. But there's no certainty over that.
Yeah, Eddie's another point which I'm sure we should give more time to in due course. I was just going to pick up on something that Joe said about Ethan Nwaneri, because I know that this is a point that Arsenal fans are getting increasingly frustrated with Arteta about, the lack of trust in the youngsters. And it feels like Arsenal, even maybe more so than any other club, are just obsessed with their academy, and rightly so. Like they took a lot of pride in Smith Rowe and Iwobi, and of course Saka coming through Haaland. And the fact that they left this summer, lots of those players in Smith Rowe and Reece Nelson, was a huge blow to them. I think they could understand the reasons, but there was like an outpouring of almost kind of grief that they didn't make it at Arsenal. So the fact that Nwaneri is getting very few minutes in the Premier League, I think is frustrating some Arsenal fans. But as a counter-argument to that, Arsenal know that a bad month in the Premier League, and they're in the middle of one right now, can ruin your title challenges. Like it absolutely did last December, losing to Fulham, losing to West Ham. It's a big ask for Nwaneri to come in there and instantly look Arsenal ready. And at the moment, I think he maybe has sacrificed too much going to this 4-4-2, but I can understand why. But Arsenal fans are frustrated because last year, only Spurs gave fewer minutes to teenagers in the Premier League. They gave 13 minutes to teenagers. Man United, I know that's because of Garnacho and Mainu and circumstance, and they were struggling, Arsenal going for a title, but they gave nearly 5,000. So completely other end of the scale. So you can see the Nwaneri thing becoming frustrating. You're right to bring up the Champions League tonight, Joe, because as we film this, we don't know what happens in that. But Arsenal in the Champions League, they're sitting pretty in terms of points, but their performances in terms of their underlying numbers are even worse. Only Lille and Shakhtar Donetsk are averaging fewer shots per game in the Champions League than Arsenal.
Haven't conceded a goal yet, though.
Haven't conceded a goal. And look, there's been a very solid performance in there against PSG. But the Arsenal of last season, I thought were thrilling. I thought they were a brilliant watch. I thought they deserved to win the league. I thought they were so entertaining. And I thought they played the better football across the entire season than Man City. And so far this summer, it feels like Arteta went, he feels still so damaged by that Saliba end of the year before where he gets injured. And he wanted so much depth in defence. And there is an amazing array of defenders now at Arsenal. But did he leave himself open in terms of the attacking depth? And Odegaard's injury, people thought Odegaard crucial for Arsenal, but I don't think they thought it would be a kind of this big a deal.
Yeah.
Look, he was amazing last year. I think it was most passes into the box in the entirety of Europe, way more than next best Bruno Fernandes. Third for progressive passes in the entirety of Europe as well. But should one player's absence have this sort of impact when we've seen Liverpool seasons in the past keep title challenges going much deeper with players out? We've seen City this year with Rodri and KDB. I know they've had a difficult last week or so, but they're still far ahead of where Arsenal are. So it felt almost like such a demoralising result that Odegaard's injury would have so much impact on who else in this squad. I mean, Joe, do you think that there are some other issues around other players underperforming? Like, do we need to see more from Martinelli? Do we need to see more from Trossard? Do we need to see more from Declan Rice?
I mean, certainly Gabriel Martinelli. I think that's a legitimate argument and a debate being had amongst Arsenal fans. You look at his numbers, his underlying numbers, way down. On the heights of Gabriel Martinelli, his pressing numbers, way down. On the heights of Gabriel Martinelli, where we saw Jurgen Klopp talking about him being, one of the future greats in the game. That Martinelli hasn't quite progressed to the stage where I think we thought we'd see him now, where we were expecting maybe a 15-goal a season winger. Hasn't really happened. Now, that's not to say it's going to happen because he's still so young, but I think there can be legitimate question marks asked from Arsenal fans about the summer business in forward areas. Raheem Sterling felt less like a plan and more like a door opening that we can walk through and say, okay, this is a good option for us. It felt in the summer amongst a lot of Arsenal fans, I think, that they needed a lights-out forward. Now, some camps had that down as being a number 9 to replace Kai Havertz. Didn't necessarily agree with that. I think his underlying numbers last season when he played in that number 9 role, his shots and goals per 90 were some of the best in the league when he was playing as an out-and-out number 9. So if they can keep him in there, I think it's less of an issue than having a lights-out left winger. Because you look at the balance of the attacks, you look at the splits in percentage of which side the Arsenal attacks come down, particularly in the absence of Martin Odegaard. We're talking like 60% plus coming down that right-hand side through Bukayo Saka and the overlap of Ben White. Whereas Gabriel Martinelli's numbers have kind of hindered that. I don't think he's been particularly helped by the constant change at left back. He's had Calafiori there, he's had Timber there, Zinchenko's played there,
and the midfielder behind
Skelly's played there at times. Like, it hasn't been ideal because of the injuries, but overall his output has waned in the last couple of seasons. His expected goal numbers are way down per 90, and do we see them picking back up? In the short term, I'm a little bit worried.
He looks sharper than he did last year, but there's still not the sort of numbers to
so should they have gone out and signed, a blockbuster left winger? And I think that potentially is a legitimate argument. Whether or not they had the funds to do that, though, I think that's the real chat, isn't it? But did they spend their money that they got in for selling the Haaland boys on the defensive unit because they were worried, like you said, about the cover for Saliba, the cover for Gabriel should he get injured, whether or not Timber was going to return at full fitness? I think that's where they spent the money this summer, and maybe in hindsight, it was better spent on a lights out forward.
And this kind of brings us back to the overall picture at Arsenal. For sure, it is early days.
I mean, it's over a quarter of the way through. I don't think it's that early.
But also,
it's November, mate. It's November.
It's November. We've had 10 games.
7 months of season
left.
It's
time to... as Mikey pointed out, I think Spurs dropped from 1st to 5th, and there was a couple of other sides that moved 2 or 3 places either side. And look, I don't think anyone's saying, I'm certainly not, I don't think Arsenal are going to miss out on top 4. But to be potentially out of the title race, seemingly, in mid-November, which could easily happen.
They're not out of the title race.
If it carries on like this in the next couple of weeks, they could be.
But equally, I think they are kind of lucky not to be out of the title race, right? Because we've seen the fragilities in Man City so far as well.
I think they're lucky and unlucky.
And Liverpool
Was the Declan Rice a red card? If not, they'd have 2 greater points. They'd be, a point behind?
They might have 2 further points, but it's also quite a silly mistake. And that's what all these red cards feel avoidable as well. Like the Saliba error, the Trossard error, he doesn't need to do that. These are points dropped in crucial games.
It's too early to be saying they're out of a title race.
But I also think that the situation behind the scenes at Arsenal, if they don't get it sorted quickly, or at least they don't assert themselves quickly, that could also be something that's destabilising for the rest of the season as well. And it goes back to the summer. It's now been reported that Edu was frustrated at the fact that they didn't put more money towards attacking signings. And does that, I don't know, you don't want to speculate too much, but was that, Arteta gaining more and more power with transfers? Not quite sure. Or that was... the overall kind of transfer, committee, as it were. That's that's not the official name for it, but in terms of the hierarchy at Arsenal, was there a bit of a power struggle there potentially? And is that why, he's decided to resign despite Arsenal apparently offering him like much better wages? Apparently he's going to triple his wages working under Marinakis in that 3-club group. Again, like this all kind of interlinks a little bit, and you do wonder whether, in the next transfer window, next summer's transfer window, whether Arsenal are going to, are we going to see Arsenal improve in the transfer market, or could we have seen Arsenal's best days in terms of their transfer business?
Generally,
they could be behind
transfer
them.
business has been good.
It has been good,
well.
but that's where I worry more for Arsenal, if I'm honest. Like, this season is this season, right? Like, Arsenal might not win the league this season, and that's fine. Like, they're still coming up against a Pep Guardiola Man City team. Like, it's always going to be really, really tough. Arsenal, for however good they've been and however much they've progressed over the last 2-3 years, they're not quite at the level of like Klopp's Liverpool at their peak. Like, they're not. They're at an amazing level, but they're not quite at that level. And to get to that level is really, really difficult. Man City aren't even at that level at this moment in time. Like, they are not the team that they were a few years ago. But nevertheless, it's a really, really tough job. The worry, I think, with Arsenal is that if we've seen their best transfer business over the last few years and they're not going to improve in that regard, or they're not going to go out and upgrade the attack in the way that they probably need to if they're going to consistently challenge over the next few years, then suddenly, if Chelsea are going to improve over the next few years, God forbid if Man United improve like drastically under Amorim, it feels hard to imagine that right now, but you never know.
They're a long way behind Arsenal, though, aren't they, right now?
They are, but things can change quickly, and Slot at Liverpool could be a much quicker, wouldn't say turnaround, but you know what I mean. Slot could have success at Liverpool more quickly than we're anticipating as well, and suddenly kind of Arsenal's emergence as the preeminent force in football, in English football.
This feels like a panic to me. This feels like a panic.
I don't think it is.
Games into this season.
It's not about this season though. I'm talking about seasons to come, because like Edu was the defining figure of the Arteta era in terms of behind the scenes at Arsenal, and in terms of the transfer business they did, which was so integral to Arsenal's progression over the last few years. And now there is a void there. Like I do think I cannot. Like, I don't think that Arsenal fans are not concerned by that. Like, I think that is a concerning revelation, and I know there was talk about it over the summer in terms of like Marinakis wanting to bring him in to his project, but I don't think Arsenal were. I don't think they were prepared for Edu leaving the club, say, a year ago. Like, Arteta, when he signed his contract, was on record saying that he was hoping to work with Edu for the foreseeable future. Like, that's a big shock to the system, I think, at Arsenal. And so whoever they appoint next is going to be, it could be era-defining for them, because, the decision to sell, the players that they did this summer, has so far not worked this season in terms of the lack of backup in forward areas.
Yeah. You keep on saying it's 10 games in. I don't think that's an insignificant amount of games. I really don't. I think you can take quite a good measure of how a team is performing after 10 games. And at the moment, Arsenal, across the board in their underlying numbers, are mid-table. And I'm not saying they're going to finish in mid-table. And yes, you've got to take in injuries. You've got to take in red cards. But their possession is now just 50%. That's 10th in the league. Their shots per game has dropped to 10th in the league. Their pass accuracy down to 10th in the league. Their shots against per game, the real bedrock of Arsenal last season, their defensive solidity, 12th in the league. And it feels like, I don't think we can just underplay this as just, Odegaard's been out and there have been some injury issues. Like, this is a side that are not playing towards their potential at the moment. And I think it's one thing missing out on a title to Pep Guardiola's Man City, which they might well do. But to finish behind Arne Slot's Liverpool would be a massive disappointment this season, given the fact they were numerous points clear of them at the end of last season, on 89 points, ready to take the next step, seemingly. And look, things can change quickly, and maybe they will. But at the moment, I'd be surprised to see Arsenal win the league. I'd be very surprised to see them go deep in the Champions League if they keep operating like this. It just doesn't feel like they are ready to take that next step. I can't say it any other way. Like, they might change fast, but I do think there are alarm bells in the distance. Maybe they're not full ringing in your ears yet, but you've got to be aware of how this situation is developing.
I think you could say a lot of similar stuff for Manchester City. Alarm bells ringing in the distance, Chicky Begaristan leaving, Pep's in his last year of his contract. They've got a large proportion of the best players in their squad over the age of 30 years old, a lack of goals from wide areas, massive defensive injuries. So I think you could say similar sort of things that we're 10 games in and on the horizon, there's big problems. But I'm not worried about Manchester City either. I still think that Mikel Arteta is such a high-level coach that he will find a solution to these early season problems. That solution
what does that solution result in? Because I think he'll
that
find a
solution
solution
results
too.
in a title challenge and going very deep in the Champions League, probably a semi-final onwards.
Okay. I mean, fair enough. I think at the moment, on the basis of what I've seen, I can't see them doing that unless there is a real crazy significant upturn, which there could be.
You don't see them being involved in a title challenge this year.
Unless they seriously up their level. They could be out of it by the end of the next month or so. I really do genuinely believe that. The way Liverpool are performing, 14 wins from 16 games, the best start in English football history for a new manager. They look pretty faultless. They're improving as second halves go on. Their bench is better than Arsenal's right now. They have more players in better form.
I think Liverpool are going to be involved in a title race as well, but I just don't think we can discount Arsenal from a title race this early in the season, contextualising it around the injury problems they've had, the discipline problems, and the fixture schedule. Would Liverpool be in this position if they'd had to go away to Villa, away to Spurs, away to Man City, early doors? Like, I know they've gone to Arsenal and the performance was good, but I didn't look at that Arsenal game against Liverpool and think, Liverpool are miles better than Arsenal here. I think for the large majority of that game, Arsenal were the better side.
For sure.
Yeah,
I think that's one thing that's one thing that kind of counts for Liverpool as well, is that Liverpool are actually yet to hit like peak form as well, and yet they're already in a position where they're 7 points above Arsenal. It really serves them in good stead. But you're right. Like, I think Arsenal have probably, fixture-wise, have probably got through their most difficult period of the season. I think this 10-game run, give or take, I guess. They played Leicester and Southampton at home. They probably won't get two easier games than that. But the aways have been really, but also it means that like two of their away fixtures in the second half of the season are going to be against Southampton and Leicester. So like they have got through their toughest run of fixtures this season. I think they won't face Liverpool or Newcastle again until May, which obviously isn't ideal in the run-in. Like Man City, already, you look at the last 10 fixtures of the season, out of Arsenal, Liverpool and City have the easiest run-in. Once again, year. Always happens. I think Liverpool who have they got in the last? They've got Arsenal, the Spurs, Chelsea and Arsenal in a row in April and May. So like that could be a factor come then. But basically, Man City, I think they've got a really tough January. They've got Chelsea, Arsenal, Newcastle, Liverpool and Spurs in a row, and PSG in the Champions League around that time as well. So it does feel like if Arsenal are within touching distance in January, given the problems that Man City have, which I don't know if we want to get onto them in a second, maybe that's going to be the time where we see them make up ground. Because I do agree, like Arsenal have had a tough start to the season. Given the other circumstances we're talking about, they've also had pretty tough games as well. Liverpool also have the advantage, though, of having already gone to Man United with Ten Hag in charge, and City and Arsenal have to go there
Amorim.
Under Amorim. So yeah, Amorim will decide this title race.
He could well do. But yeah, let's talk about City actually, because whilst we can debate whether Arsenal are having a difficult start to the season. By City standards, they definitely are. By their own standards, they've lost 3 games in a row for the first time since 2017-18. Should be noted that year they finished with 100 points and broke the Premier League goal scoring record. So I think it's all sort of relative, isn't it? But whereas Arsenal are, 7 points behind, they're only 2 points behind Liverpool at the time of recording. Only Spurs have scored more goals than them, 22-21. They're 6th in the Champions League as we record this. Of course, there's another half a match day to go, but they've got 2 wins from 4 games. Only Dortmund have scored more than their 10 Champions League goals. But at the same time, what you're hearing from their players, Bernardo Silva said last night after the Sporting defeat, we're in a dark place. And Pep said, we've got serious issues and the sort of things that we haven't really had to face in recent years. I was watching Liverpool-Leverkusen last night because I banked on that being an entertaining game. But I'm sure with your guys' United hats on, you were probably watching Sporting CP Man City. What did you see, Joe, in terms of City issues?
Look,
or is it just personnel?
It's a mixture of everything. For the first 30 minutes of that game, City were totally dominant. Could have been 3-4-0 up, honestly. You watch Rúben Amorim's post-match interview. I think he said as much, didn't he? That the first half was very, very lucky that they got anything out of that first half. And it's true. City can still just create chances at will. But there is no denying that they are more fragile to fast breaks this season. I think Sporting really played on that in the second half. They used Victor Gyökeres's pace and power. And I think partly that is down to a personnel issue. They definitely have less control in the game. Without Rodri there, control off the ball is not as good. And defensively, you know, they're playing Simpson Poussey there yesterday. Like, he's not John Stones. He's not Rúben Diaz. These are young lads being thrown in the deep end.
He was his first start for the club.
Exactly. So it's going to be tough. The difference, I suppose, with Man City is we've got proven history, haven't we? To Arsenal, we've got proven history of a bit of a slow start for City this year. I feel like we have this discussion every year. It's like, City don't look quite themselves, and then it comes to January and it's just like 17 wins in a row. Yeah, so that is going to be an interesting narrative to see whether they can do that, because for me, personnel-wise, it is slightly different this year. You know, the wide players aren't as natural goal scorers as Pep has once had in the past, when he had players like Sterling and Mahrez, who would put up, you know, you would suggest over 10 league goals and a large number of assists. Do I see Doku, Grealish, Savio getting up towards that 10-15 goal number? I think it's maybe a little bit more of a struggle. Like Gvardiol was chipping in an awful lot of goals, isn't he? If Haaland picks up an injury, who covers for him with no Julian Alvarez there? Obviously KDB has started the season with injury problems. I think City's squad for the first time in a long time looks and feels a little bit vulnerable. And that is a rare sight for Manchester City. Whether or not that comes down to the summer planning or just the volume of injuries they've picked up, because it is an awful lot, I'm not too sure.
Yeah, it is interesting that you say about City's squad, because I think City fans themselves have pointed out that it's been thin for a number of years, really, that Pep likes to operate with a sort of key squad of about 17, 18 players at max, really. And they just churn through games year on year on year, going deep in pretty much every competition, winning most of them. And it feels like maybe this year, on the back of a Euros, on the back of a Copa America, with lots of their players were involved in, a lot of their stars haven't really hit the ground running. I don't think Kyle Walker's been anywhere near his usual level. And to be fair, that's not a brand new thing either. I think he was sort of declining towards the end of last season as well. Phil Foden, from PFA Player of the Year, struggling to get in that side, did score an excellent goal last night, but hasn't really got going.
Do you not think that's a positive, though, the fact that Phil Foden's actually been used quite sparingly? So we're yet to really see Phil Foden. I mean, he's got 3 goals in the Champions League already, and he started the last 2 Premier League games. But like, I feel like Phil Foden's season is only just starting, and we're in November. Like, I feel like that is still an advantage that City have. Like, you can't say that Arteta's got someone like that to call on. Like, Arteta wasn't able to just like have Saka like coming off the bench in August and September. Like, that's a huge privilege to have for City. And I guess that, I think that's something that works in their favour. Like, I'm not really worried about City at all going forward, to be honest, unless Erling Haaland picks up like an injury bigger than he had last season, which would be pretty catastrophic. Even then, like, I don't know, like
Foden's a false 9.
Yeah, like big chances though, man. They are conceding big chances.
Defensively, it's a problem, but it's not really anything new. Like, I mean, this season they are conceding over 1 XG a game, which I can't remember City ever doing that really under Pep. Maybe in his first season, maybe second season. I'm not so sure, but it has been trending that way. That's the thing. It's nothing new. Like, so back in 21-22, you know, that last great title race with Liverpool that they had, they were conceding 0.6 XG a game, which is nothing. I think it was like 24 XG over the course of the season. In a 38 game season, that's outrageous. The season after that went up to 0.8. Then last season it was 0.9, and especially around January, February last season, we really did see them becoming more susceptible to the break. And I don't know whether that's to do with the use of someone like Gvardiol, who is so is a great defender, but is used so much in the final third by Guardiola. And, you know, is there really enough cover in that system for him when possession breaks down, especially without Rodri? I think that is a problem for sure. So I think this is something that City have, like, I guess not addressed enough over the last 2-3 years, let alone in the last year. And Kyle Walker, you know, previously, you know, been so relied upon for his recovery pace and whatnot. Like, he's in and out of the side now. Rico Lewis is playing, has been playing minutes in midfield and as a right back. Rico Lewis obviously massively talented, but a lot to ask for a player who previously was, most of his minutes came in Europe. He was used very, very sparingly in the Premier League. So it feels like they're in a bit of a transitional moment there. And then when Rúben Diaz is missing, him and Rodri being out of the side, it's obviously going to be a problem. Having said that, like Haaland is putting up the best shot numbers of his Premier League career. I think the last time he was putting up as many shots as he currently is, which I think is around 4.7 per 90, he was back at Salzburg. So I still feel like City's attack can bail them out. Whereas like compared to Arsenal, there's just not that they don't necessarily have that, because their defence isn't quite what it was last season. Their attack is nowhere near what it's been in the past. City at least have that cheat code in them, and also have the confidence. They have the experience. They have the confidence of having gone deep in so many title races and won them. Like there is that kind of intangible there as well. But in the long term, like City, I think especially in midfield, right? Like how many they barely have a midfielder under the age of 30, Man City. Like in the long term, that's a problem, and that's going to be I feel like the first thing on Hugo Viana's desk is like how do we make this midfield like the best in the world again, because it's not now. You
kind of segue quite nicely into other factors that could be at play. I'm not saying they are the key reason, but Chiqui Bergerstein's now leaving. Guardiola, it's unclear about his future. There's just maybe simple burnout as well with a lot of these players. They played a ridiculous amount of games over the last 4 or 5 years under the most demanding manager in world football, who he himself has said, we're playing too much football. And a number of his key stars have said the same thing. Rodri, who advertised for it, or argued for it most of all, then does his ACL. And then you also look at, the fact that they've got this impending court case. That could be playing on their minds. They don't really know what's going to happen there. And I'm not going to speculate on it, but titles could be stripped. They could be found innocent. No one has a clue. So there are a number of factors that could be weighing on their shoulders
their
right
innocence,
now.
Of course.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's only accusations, but it's gone to court and we'll see what happens. But I don't worry for City in the same way as I do Arsenal, for those reasons that I do think they've got just significantly better depth in forward areas, which in a long slog of a season, coming off a big international summer, I just think makes such a key difference. Guys, before a ball was kicked this season, I went City... no, that's not true. Sorry. I went Arsenal, City, Liverpool. I think I'm going to change that around quite significantly. I think I'm going to say City, Liverpool, then Arsenal in third. Wow. What would you go for, Joe?
I can't remember what I said at the start of the season, to be honest with you. I had Liverpool third, but I can't remember whether I went Arsenal or City. I would probably lean towards City now as well, just because I feel like with Kevin De Bruyne coming back, that they will refine form pretty quickly. And we always say, City have started a bit slow, not quite City, and then they always just turn it around, whereas I didn't necessarily see Arsenal starting this defensively. I want to see a little bit more excitement in the Arsenal game, but I'm still going to go City, Arsenal, Liverpool.
Okay, Mikey?
Yeah, I think I was pretty wild at the start of the season. I think I might have even said Arsenal, City, and potentially Spurs third, and Liverpool getting in fourth. I just didn't see them starting so seamlessly under Arne Slot. But I would now say I'd probably say the same as Joe. To be honest, I'd probably say I think City edge it now, but I'd still have Arsenal in second. And Liverpool in third.
Okay, guys, get your thoughts about the title race, whether Arsenal fans need to be worried, how much better they're going to get over the next few weeks, whether City fans need to be worried, in the comments down below, along with your predicted end of season tables. Why not? We know it's early doors, but let's have that discussion. Massive thanks to Mikey, huge thanks to Joe, and we'll catch you next week.